For years, I had been on the move, constantly chasing the next deal, the next investment, the next opportunity. I'd built a life from nothing, starting out in the real estate business with barely a penny to my name, and turned it into something more than I could have ever imagined. By the time I reached my 60s, I had accumulated a fortune of over $50 million. I was proud of what I had accomplished, but more than that, I felt a deep satisfaction in knowing that my success would eventually provide a comfortable life for my son, Mark, and his family. I often sat back and thought about how I had always put my work first. For decades, I had poured my soul into my business, and now it seemed like I was finally getting the chance to relax. I had recently bought a beautiful penthouse in Beverly Hills, an opulent, modern space overlooking the city skyline, and I had begun spending more time with my grandchildren. I even thought about taking a holiday, maybe traveling to Italy or France. The idea of stepping away from the grind and enjoying the fruits of my labor was intoxicating. But my sense of peace was fleeting. I couldn't escape the nagging feeling that something was missing, or rather, something was off. It had been there for a while, a small, almost imperceptible feeling that I couldn't shake, an unease that had been growing every time I saw my daughter-in-law, Olivia. Olivia was everything I wasn't. She was young, beautiful, and magnetic, always the center of attention in any room she entered. She had charm in abundance, the kind of effortless charisma that made people like her instantly. But underneath that polished exterior, I couldn't help but sense a deeper ambition, a hunger that made me wary. I remember the first time I met her, years ago, when she and Mark had just started dating. I had hoped for someone who would treat my son with kindness, someone who would support him and share his values. But Olivia, she was different. She was all about the image, perfectly tailored clothes, flawless makeup, and a smile that never seemed to reach her eyes. When Mark told me they were getting married, I tried to put my doubts aside, convinced that maybe I was reading too much into things. But now, as I sat in my study one afternoon, I couldn't ignore the feeling any longer. It was late afternoon, the sun dipping below the horizon, casting a soft golden light through the large windows of my home. I was sitting at my desk, reviewing some financial statements and planning for the future of my business. I had just turned the page of an important document when I heard a soft knock on the door. "Come in," I called, looking up to see my son, Mark, entering the room with his usual quiet smile. "Hey, Mom," he said, his voice warm but with a touch of something I couldn't quite place. "Olivia and I were hoping we could talk to you about something." I raised an eyebrow, setting the papers aside. Mark was a lawyer by trade, and while I trusted him, I could sense he was holding something back. His unease wasn't lost on me. "Sure, what's going on?" I asked, motioning for him to sit. He took a seat across from me, and Olivia, who had been standing behind him, slowly walked in and sat down beside him. She smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes, and I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. "We've been thinking," Olivia began, her voice smooth and calculated, "about how we can help you with the business. You've done so much on your own, but we think it's time you started letting us take on more responsibility." I studied her face for a moment. She was leaning forward slightly, as though trying to sell me on an idea that wasn't as innocent as it appeared. I had been in this game for too long to be fooled by a smile and a few kind words. I could feel the weight of her gaze on me, the pressure to agree. But I wasn't about to be swayed so easily. "I'm not sure I understand," I said, my tone firm but calm. "You want to help with the business?" "Yes, exactly," Mark said quickly, his voice more relaxed than Olivia's. "You've built something amazing, Mom. We just want to help you expand it even more. You've been doing everything yourself, but it's a lot, and maybe it's time to bring in new ideas." Olivia nodded, a small, knowing smile on her face. "We've got the skills. Between Mark's legal expertise and my background in marketing, we could really take things to the next level. And don't worry, we're not suggesting you retire. You can still be involved, of course. But we just think it might be time for a new chapter." I paused, my fingers tapping lightly on the edge of my desk. The offer sounded generous on the surface, too generous, in fact. I had always been a hands-on kind of person, and my company wasn't just a business to me, it was my life's work. To suddenly hand over the reins, even partially, felt wrong. "I don't know, Olivia." "Mark," I said slowly, choosing my words carefully. "This is my life's work. I didn't build it for anyone else to take over just yet. I'm not ready to step back." Mark's face dropped, but he quickly recovered. "It's not like that, Mom. We just want to support you. Think of it as a partnership. We help carry some of the burden, and you get to focus on what you love." I looked at Olivia, who was watching me intently, her fingers nervously adjusting the hem of her blouse. Her expression was polite, but there was a subtle intensity in her eyes, something that unsettled me. I had seen that look before in others who had hidden agendas. I wasn't sure what exactly they were after, but I knew it wasn't just a partnership. Olivia had been pushing for something like this for months, ever since she had started showing interest in my business. And I had always put her off, hoping she'd lose interest, but now I realized it wasn't going to stop until I gave them something. What, exactly, I wasn't sure, but I had a feeling I wouldn't like it. "I'll need time to think about it," I said, forcing a smile. "This isn't something I can decide on the spot. But I'll let you know soon." They left my office with a sense of quiet victory hanging in the air. But as I sat there, staring out the window at the setting sun, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that I had just been offered a deal I couldn't refuse, but one I also couldn't trust. I was right to be suspicious. The next morning, I began looking through old files in my office, reviewing documents, contracts, and financial statements. I had always kept everything in order, but something told me I needed to look deeper, into the past, into my will, into everything that had been so carefully arranged. It wasn't just the business I had built that I needed to protect. It was everything, including my legacy. The following morning, after the unnerving conversation with Mark and Olivia, I couldn't get the idea of their proposal out of my mind. I knew they weren't being completely transparent with me. There was something hidden in the way they spoke, in the way Olivia had leaned forward, in the way Mark had tried so hard to reassure me. If it was really about helping me, why the urgency? Why the sense of pressure that felt more like manipulation? I spent the morning at my desk, scanning through old company documents and financial records, searching for anything that might explain their sudden interest in my business. But nothing stood out. It was as though they had been planning this for months, perhaps even longer. My company was thriving, my wealth was secure, and yet something was off. I had always been meticulous about my finances, ensuring that everything was in order, down to the smallest detail. But now, as I rifled through folders and drawers, I realized I was searching for something that wasn't immediately obvious. As I dug deeper into my personal files, I came across something I hadn't seen in years, a leather-bound folder, tucked away in the back of my filing cabinet, hidden beneath layers of other papers. The folder was dusty, untouched for what seemed like ages. I pulled it out, my fingers trembling as I opened it. Inside were a few old letters and some business contracts from years ago, but one document stood out among the rest. It was a letter from a lawyer, dated nearly 10 years ago, when my late husband, Robert, had passed away. The letter was addressed to both of us, but I had forgotten about it, likely because I had assumed it was part of some long-forgotten legal matter that had never come to fruition. I read through it carefully. The letter contained details about a trust, a separate fund that Robert had set up shortly before his death. At first glance, it didn't seem like much. But something in the tone of the letter caught my attention. There was a mention of specific conditions regarding how the trust could be accessed, conditions that I had never paid attention to before. As I continued reading, a sense of dread began to creep over me. The letter outlined the stipulations for the trust in minute detail, and there, in the small print, was a clause I had missed all those years ago. It said that the trust could only be fully accessed if certain family members were involved in the management of my business, and, more alarmingly, if my son Mark and his wife, Olivia, played an active role in its future operations. I blinked, rereading the clause several times, trying to make sense of what it meant. Why hadn't I noticed this before? Why was I only seeing it now, after all these years? And more importantly, why had Robert set this up without telling me? I wasn't sure whether this was a safeguard or a trap, but I could feel my blood run cold. The clause wasn't just about the business, it was about the very control of my wealth. Mark and Olivia's sudden interest in helping me now made sense. They weren't offering to help me, they were offering to take what was mine. Suddenly, it all clicked into place. Olivia wasn't just after my business. She wanted my money. I could feel the weight of the truth settling heavily on my chest. She had been playing a long game, and now she was positioning herself to take over everything. I had to act fast. I folded the letter back into the folder, my mind racing with the implications of what I had just uncovered. If Mark and Olivia knew about this clause, if they had been waiting for me to finally agree to their proposal, they would be in the perfect position to take control of my wealth, my business, and everything I had built over the years. I wasn't going to let that happen. Not without a fight. I needed to be smarter than them. I needed to outplay them at their own game. And I wasn't going to let them think they had the upper hand anymore. I called my lawyer, David Lawrence, a trusted family attorney who had been handling my affairs for years. He was a quiet man, always calm and measured, and I needed that right now. "I need to meet with you as soon as possible," I said, my voice steady but urgent. "It's about the trust Robert set up. There's something you need to know." David agreed to meet me the next day. I spent the rest of the afternoon trying to clear my head, going through the document again and again, making sure I hadn't missed anything. I thought about my late husband, about his vision for our family, and I couldn't help but wonder if Robert had known something I didn't. But the most pressing question on my mind was how to protect myself. How could I keep Olivia and Mark from taking what wasn't theirs? How could I fight back against a betrayal that ran so deep? The next morning, I met David in his office. He listened carefully as I explained the situation, detailing the discovery of the letter and the hidden clause in the trust. He took his time, reviewing the document I had brought with me, his brow furrowed in concentration. "You're right," he said finally, looking up at me with a grave expression. "This clause changes everything. It seems like your husband set up a system where, if certain conditions were met, control of your assets would pass to Mark and Olivia." "Exactly," I replied. "And I'm not sure how, but they seem to know about it. They're pushing me to expand the business, but I think they want much more than that. They want everything." David leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "I'll look into this further, but we need to proceed with caution. If Olivia and Mark are already aware of this clause, they may have already started plotting how to get you to sign over control." A chill ran down my spine. I knew David was right. They were playing a dangerous game, and I had to be one step ahead. If I was going to protect myself, I needed to outsmart them at every turn. The meeting with David confirmed everything I feared. Olivia and Mark were playing a much bigger game than I'd originally suspected. It wasn't just about the business, it was about total control. They had known about the clause in the trust for far longer than I had, probably even before I'd realized it myself. I had always prided myself on being a step ahead of the competition, but this time, I had underestimated Olivia's cold calculation. The following days were a blur. I couldn't focus on anything other than the weight of what I'd uncovered. Every interaction with Olivia now seemed tinted with a sense of deception. She was playing a role, pretending to be sweet and caring, all while scheming behind closed doors. Every time I looked at her, I saw the ambition in her eyes, the same ambition that had driven her to manipulate Mark, to pull him into her plan. I knew that if I wasn't careful, I'd be left with nothing but a shadow of the life I'd worked so hard to build. I began to pay closer attention to the small details, to every word Olivia said, every gesture she made. It didn't take long for me to notice patterns in her behavior. Her kindness was always tinged with ulterior motives, a carefully constructed mask hiding her true intentions. She would come to visit me under the pretense of concern, asking how I was doing, offering to help with anything, and yet always managing to steer the conversation toward my business. It was during one of these visits that I realized just how deep her manipulations ran. I had invited Olivia over for tea, hoping to catch her off guard, to see if I could learn anything more. She arrived with her usual pleasant smile, her hair impeccably styled, and a fresh pot of herbal tea in hand. I had always been good at reading people, and today I was determined to see through her facade. "Is everything going well with the business, Olivia?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She smiled and sat down, crossing her legs and setting the teacup on the table with deliberate care. "Oh, everything's great, really. Mark and I were just discussing how we could expand the brand. You know, we've always admired how much you've accomplished, and we're just so eager to help you grow it even further." I studied her carefully, my mind working quickly to process her words. The usual rehearsed kindness was there, but there was something different today. A nervous edge, a slight tremor in her voice that I had never noticed before. It was subtle, but it was there. "I'm sure you've got some great ideas," I said, pretending to sip my tea as I watched her closely. "But you know, it's not easy. This business didn't just grow overnight. It took years of hard work and sacrifice." Olivia's smile faltered just for a second. Of course," she replied quickly, but I could see her eyes flicker with something, maybe impatience, maybe frustration. "But don't you think it's time to let someone else carry the torch? You've done so much, and you deserve a break, don't you think?" Her words hit a nerve. Of course, I deserved a break. I had worked myself to the bone for decades. But it wasn't just about the business anymore, it was about my family's future, my legacy. "You know, I've been thinking about what you and Mark suggested," I said, keeping my voice even. "But I'm not ready to just hand over control. Not yet. The business is more than just an asset, it's my life. My vision." Olivia's eyes darkened for just a split second before she masked it with another smile. "I completely understand, of course," she said, but the words didn't ring true. They sounded rehearsed, practiced. Like she was trying to sell me a story she had told herself 1,000 times. But then something else caught my attention, something that sent a chill down my spine. As Olivia reached for her teacup, I noticed something sticking out of the inside pocket of her blazer. It was a small, leather-bound notebook, one I recognized instantly. It was a business journal that I had kept years ago, a record of every meeting, every contract, and every major decision I had made regarding my company. I had always kept it close, never letting anyone else see it. Yet, there it was, tucked away in her jacket like some sort of trophy. I felt a tight knot form in my stomach. How did Olivia have my journal? I made a mental note to ask her about it later, but for now, I had to play it cool. "That's an interesting notebook you have there, Olivia," I said, nodding toward it. "Where did you get that?" Olivia stiffened, and for a moment, her mask slipped completely. Her eyes flickered with alarm before she quickly recovered. "Oh, this," she said, holding it up casually. "I found it in the office when I was helping Mark sort through some papers. It looked important, so I thought I'd keep it safe for you." My blood ran cold. This was no coincidence. Olivia had been digging into my private files. She had been going through my personal records without my knowledge, and now, she was pretending it was all innocent. "Is that so?" I said, my voice suddenly sharp. "And what exactly were you hoping to find in there, Olivia?" She blinked, momentarily thrown off guard by the change in my tone. But she quickly recovered, smiling again. "Nothing, really. Just wanted to help, that's all." I didn't buy it. I knew now, Olivia had been working behind the scenes for far longer than I had realized. She had been gathering information, digging into my past, trying to find a way to gain leverage over me. She had already made her move, and I was only beginning to see the full extent of her manipulations. This wasn't just about money or power. Olivia was playing a dangerous game, and I was determined to expose her before she could take everything from me. The following days were a blur of meetings and phone calls, each one focused on unraveling Olivia's manipulations. I knew I had to be careful, but the truth was becoming clearer with every passing moment. Olivia was not just after my business, she was after everything I had worked for. My wealth, my legacy, my control. And Mark, my own son, was caught in the web she had carefully woven around him. But despite my growing suspicions, I had no concrete evidence. Every time I confronted Olivia, she played the role of the sweet, supportive daughter-in-law. She made every effort to keep me calm, to make me feel like she was just trying to help. She was good, I would give her that. She knew exactly how to play on my emotions, to make me question myself, to make me wonder if I was simply overreacting. I began to feel like I was losing my grip on the situation. She was everywhere, in every corner of my life, worming her way into everything I cared about. And worse, Mark was getting pulled further into her orbit. One afternoon, I decided I needed a break. I needed to clear my head, to step away from the madness for just a moment. I told myself I would go to the local park, take a walk, and sort through my thoughts. The fresh air, the sound of birds in the trees, anything to get some perspective. But as I walked along the park's winding paths, something caught my eye. I spotted Olivia sitting on a bench, her face turned toward the ground, speaking intently on her phone. It was strange, she wasn't one to be so visibly upset. She had always been composed, polished, and controlled. Curious, I slowed my pace as I neared the bench, careful not to let her see me. I tried to listen, but the conversation was too hushed. Then, as I drew closer, I heard a name that made my heart stop. "Of course, we'll have it done," Olivia's voice was soft, almost whispering. "We just need to make sure she doesn't catch on. I'll handle it from here. Don't worry. Everything's in motion." Everything inside me froze. Who was she talking to? What did she mean by, "don't catch on"? My instincts screamed that this was it, this was the proof I had been waiting for. Olivia was plotting something big, and I was the target. I didn't wait to hear more. I turned sharply, leaving the park before she could spot me. My heart pounded in my chest as I raced back home. I had to act fast. I couldn't let Olivia get away with this. When I arrived, I immediately called David Lawrence. I needed to get the ball rolling. I needed him to take action, to find a way to protect what was mine. "I think I've found something," I said urgently when he picked up. I heard Olivia on the phone. "She's been making plans behind my back, and I think she's moving faster than I realized." David agreed to meet me that evening at his office. I needed answers, and I needed them now. As I sat in the car on my way there, I couldn't help but replay the conversation in my mind. Olivia's words, "Don't worry, everything's in motion," kept echoing in my head. What exactly was in motion? What was she planning? I arrived at David's office, my mind racing. He was already waiting for me, and as soon as I walked in, I could see the concern in his eyes. "Tell me everything," he said, motioning for me to sit down. I recounted everything, the conversation in the park, Olivia's cryptic words, and my growing suspicion that she was planning to make a move on the trust. I could see David processing the information, his mind working quickly. "I think it's time we start playing offense," he said after a long pause. "We need to get ahead of Olivia and Mark. If they're already making moves, we need to move faster." David had a point. I couldn't afford to sit back and wait for Olivia to make her next move. I had to take control, or I would lose everything. But I needed more than just a plan, I needed evidence. "Do you have any leads on what they might be planning?" David asked, his voice calm but firm. I'm not sure yet, but I think Olivia is going to try and manipulate Mark into making a move against me. She's already got him convinced that expanding the business is a good idea. But I think there's something more behind that. Something bigger. David nodded. We'll need to dig deeper. I'll get our team on it. But we also need to make sure we're covering all our bases. We can't let them see us coming. I agreed. We had to move carefully, but decisively. If Olivia and Mark were plotting something, we had to stop it before it was too late. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being drawn into a trap. I wasn't just fighting for my business anymore. I was fighting for my family's future, against my own flesh and blood. The next morning, I received a call that made my blood run cold. It was from one of my trusted employees, someone I'd known for years. He had worked in the company's finance department and had always been loyal. But now, he sounded nervous, almost frantic. "Emma," he said, his voice trembling. "I don't know how to tell you this, but I've seen some strange things happening in the office. Olivia has been meeting with people behind your back, outside consultants, investors. She's been making plans without your approval. I don't know exactly what they're up to, but I don't like it." My mind was spinning. Olivia was already making moves. She was positioning herself to take control, and I couldn't let that happen. I had to act now. I called David immediately, my voice sharp with urgency. "We need to move on this. Now. I can't wait any longer." I didn't sleep that night. The call from my employee, James, had shattered any semblance of calm I'd tried to hold on to. I had always trusted the people in my company, and the idea that Olivia had been meeting with outsiders, arranging deals behind my back, made my blood run cold. I knew now I couldn't afford to sit back any longer. Olivia's plan wasn't just about taking control of the business, it was about stealing my legacy, and, more importantly, my freedom. The following morning, I met with David Lawrence again. This time, there was no time for pleasantries. We needed to act quickly. I told him everything I had learned, the strange meetings, the investors, the sense of impending betrayal. He was quiet for a long time, his brow furrowed in thought. "Emma," he said finally, "we need to find out who these investors are. If they're connected to Olivia and Mark, we could be looking at a much larger operation than just a business takeover. It could be financial fraud, collusion, who knows what else." I nodded, my heart pounding. "I don't care what it is. I want to stop it. I want to expose her." David agreed, and we set a plan in motion to uncover everything. David's firm had connections, and within hours, he'd managed to pull some strings to gather information on Olivia's mysterious investor meetings. We were going to find out who was behind this. By late afternoon, David called me with news. "I've got a lead," he said, his voice tight. "Olivia's been meeting with a group of investors, high profile, off the record. The names are all tied to a private equity firm, but one of the individuals involved is someone from your past. Someone you might not expect." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Who?" I asked, barely able to keep my voice steady. "James Porter." The name hit me like a sledgehammer. James Porter was a name I hadn't heard in years. He was a former business partner of mine, one I had severed ties with after a bitter fallout. James was a smooth talker, charismatic and sharp as a tack, but he'd always been a risk-taker, someone who was willing to do whatever it took to get ahead. The last time I'd heard of him, he had been involved in some shady deals and had almost cost me everything. How was he involved in Olivia's scheme? I thought about it for a moment, my mind racing. Was he helping her? Was he the person pulling the strings behind her attempts to steal my wealth? I had to find out. David and I agreed to meet the next day to strategize further, but I couldn't wait that long. I had to confront Olivia. I had to know if she was working with James, if she had been playing me from the very beginning. That evening, I invited Olivia to my house under the guise of a calm, relaxed dinner. She came, as expected, with that same practiced smile, as though nothing had changed between us. But I knew better. I could see the way her eyes darted around the room, the nervousness she tried to hide, the subtle tension in her posture. "Olivia, I think we need to talk," I said once dinner was over and the plates had been cleared. "About everything." She looked up at me, her smile faltering just a little. "What do you mean?" she asked, trying to sound innocent, though the edge in her voice betrayed her. "I know about the meetings." "The investors," I said, my voice steady but filled with the weight of accusation. "I know you've been meeting with James Porter. You're trying to take control of everything I've built." Olivia's face drained of color, but she recovered quickly, as always. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, the smoothness of her voice failing to mask the slight tremor in her words. "I don't care about your lies, Olivia," I snapped. "I've already seen the evidence. You're working with him. Trying to manipulate Mark, trying to manipulate me." She looked at me for a long, tense moment, and then her mask fell. She leaned back in her chair, her eyes narrowing. "You don't understand, Emma," she said, her voice turning cold. "I never wanted this. But you left me no choice." I felt a flicker of confusion. "What are you talking about?" "Mark was always the golden child," she continued, her tone dripping with bitterness. "You always gave him everything, your love, your attention, your business. And I was just the wife. The one you never took seriously. But now that I've seen the truth, I know I can do better. I don't need you. I need what's mine." Her words hit me like a slap across the face. "You think you can just take everything? You think you can manipulate your way into everything I've built?" Olivia leaned forward, her eyes flashing with something dangerous. "You'll understand soon enough. I didn't want to do this, but you forced my hand." I stood up, my heart pounding in my chest. "You're making a mistake, Olivia. This isn't just business to me, it's my life. And I will fight for it. I will expose you." Olivia's smile returned, though it was colder now, more calculating. "Expose me? You think you can stop me? I already have everything in place. You don't stand a chance." With that, she stood up and walked out of the house, leaving me standing there, seething with anger and betrayal. I had underestimated her, but I wouldn't make that mistake again. As the door slammed behind her, I knew one thing for sure: the battle was just beginning. After my confrontation with Olivia, I felt a mix of rage and resolve flooding through me. She had pushed me to the edge, but something about her threats, the coldness in her eyes, the ease with which she spoke of betrayal, made me realize that I had to take matters into my own hands. She thought she had me cornered. She thought she had already won. But she was wrong. The next few days were a blur of quiet planning. I knew that Olivia was dangerous, but what unnerved me most was that she wasn't alone in this. Mark, my own son, had been swept up in her manipulative web. I could see the subtle ways she had wrapped herself around him, the way he blindly followed her lead. But I couldn't give up on him, not yet. I had to find a way to break through to him, to make him see the truth before it was too late. I met with David again, this time with a sense of urgency I hadn't felt before. The game had changed. We couldn't sit back and wait for Olivia to make her next move. We had to be proactive. "I've been thinking about the evidence we've gathered," I said, sitting across from David in his office. "We know about James Porter. We know about the meetings. But we need something concrete, something that'll expose Olivia for what she truly is." David nodded, his eyes sharp. "I agree. We've got a lot of circumstantial evidence, but we need something that will hold up in court. We need a paper trail. A signed contract. A recorded conversation." That's when it hit me. I had a recording. Months ago, I had installed a security system in my office, one with hidden microphones to monitor any sensitive meetings I had with my business partners. It was a precaution I had taken for the sake of security, not thinking it would ever come to something like this. I had forgotten about it until now, but as I looked at David, I realized that it might be the key to everything. "There's a recording," I said, leaning forward. "A meeting I had with Olivia and Mark a few months ago. I can't be sure, but I think it might contain some crucial information." David's eyes widened. "You have a recording of them?" I nodded. "Yes. It's in my office, on the system. We can listen to it, see if it reveals anything, any admission of guilt or illegal plans. If there's something there, we can use it against her." David smiled for the first time in days. "This could be it, Emma. This could change everything." I immediately made arrangements to access the recording. Later that afternoon, David and I were in my office, poring over the footage. The room was thick with tension as we fast-forwarded through various recordings, trying to find the one I had referenced. When we finally found it, I felt a shiver run through me. It was a conversation between Olivia, Mark, and a third party, someone I didn't recognize. They were discussing the very plans I had suspected, the takeover of my business, the manipulation of the trust, the scheming to get me out of the picture entirely. "What did I tell you?" Olivia's voice crackled through the speakers. "Once Emma is out of the way, it's all ours. The business, the money, everything." I felt my stomach drop. I had always suspected it, but hearing it confirmed was something else entirely. I know, Mark's voice responded, sounding almost nervous. "But, she's my mother. I can't just—" "You don't have to do anything," Olivia interrupted sharply. "I'll handle it. All you have to do is sit back and let it happen. Once the business is ours, we'll have everything we need. We'll be set for life." The conversation went on, discussing specific details about how they planned to manipulate me into agreeing to the changes to the trust. They spoke about the so-called expansion plans, the same plans they had pitched to me in the past weeks. It was all laid out, step by step, just as I had feared. Olivia had been playing Mark like a puppet, pushing him to make decisions that would lead to my downfall. The recording ended, and I sat in stunned silence for a moment, my heart racing. This was it. This was the proof I needed to expose Olivia and stop her in her tracks. "We've got them," David said quietly, his voice tinged with awe. "This is exactly what we needed." I nodded, feeling a sense of relief wash over me. But it was fleeting. I knew this was just the beginning. I had the proof, but Olivia wasn't going to give up that easily. She would fight back, and when she did, it would be a battle for everything I had. "We can take this to court," David continued. "With this recording, we have grounds for a case. We can expose everything. Olivia's scheme, Mark's involvement, everything." But even as David spoke, I knew it wasn't going to be that simple. Olivia was clever, and she would do everything in her power to discredit me. I had to be prepared for a fight. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I had the truth on my side, and I was going to make sure the world knew it. That evening, I decided to take a more personal approach. I knew that Olivia wouldn't back down easily, and it was time to confront her once and for all. The next morning, I called her, my voice calm but resolute. "I have proof of what you're doing," I said when she answered the phone. "I know everything, about the meetings, the investors, and your plans to take everything I've built. I'm not going to let you get away with it." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When Olivia spoke, her voice was cold, controlled. "You really think you can stop me? You think your little recording will change anything?" I swallowed hard, but I wasn't backing down. "I'm going to take this to court. I'm going to expose you, Olivia. You've already lost." The line went dead. I knew she wouldn't go down without a fight, but I had the upper hand now. The truth was on my side, and there was no turning back. The court hearing was set. I had spent the days leading up to it gathering everything I could, documents, the recording, testimonies from those who had witnessed Olivia's manipulations. David, my lawyer, had been working tirelessly, ensuring every detail was in place. The stakes had never been higher. This wasn't just about a business deal gone wrong, this was about my family, my legacy, and the truth finally coming to light. As I walked into the courtroom that morning, I couldn't help but feel a sense of calm wash over me. I had done everything I could to prepare. The evidence was irrefutable. It was no longer about what I suspected, it was about what I knew. Olivia's scheme had been exposed. All that was left was to let the truth take its course. Olivia was already seated when I arrived. She looked impeccable, as always, her face an unreadable mask. Mark, my son, sat beside her, looking conflicted but resolute, as though he had already made up his mind about where his loyalties lay. The sight of him next to her, his face so full of doubt, twisted something deep inside me. I had never wanted to fight against him, but I knew I had no choice. He had been manipulated, and now it was time for him to see the truth. I sat at my side of the courtroom, feeling the weight of the moment settle over me. My heart was steady, my mind focused. There was no turning back now. The judge entered, a tall man with a stern face, and the proceedings began. The opening statements were a blur. David stood up, outlining the case against Olivia and Mark. He spoke with confidence, laying out the facts in a way that left no room for doubt. We are here today because the defendant, Olivia Bennett, has deliberately sought to manipulate her way into controlling assets that do not belong to her. Through deceitful means, including falsified business meetings and covert agreements, she has attempted to gain control of Emma Hayes' business and fortune, David said, his voice strong and commanding. We have concrete evidence, including a recorded conversation that exposes her plan. The room went silent. Olivia's face remained stoic, but I saw the flicker of unease in her eyes. She wasn't expecting this. She hadn't counted on me fighting back with everything I had. David continued, calling witnesses to the stand who had seen Olivia's actions firsthand. One by one, they testified to the meetings she'd arranged, the false promises she had made, the way she had manipulated Mark into thinking he was doing the right thing. Each testimony felt like a victory, but it wasn't enough yet. We needed the recording, the moment when Olivia herself would be forced to face her own words. David turned to me. Ms. Hayes, would you like to present the recording? I nodded. This was it. I had been waiting for this moment, knowing that once Olivia heard her own voice, it would all come crashing down. David handed me the microphone as the court clerk set up the audio equipment. I felt the weight of everyone's gaze on me, but I didn't falter. As the recording began to play, Olivia's voice filled the courtroom. I'll handle it, Olivia said, her voice as clear as day. Once Emma is out of the way, it's all ours. The business, the money, everything. My heart sank as the words rang out in the sterile, silent room. I watched as Olivia's expression shifted from arrogance to disbelief. She shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her face pale, her lips pressed tight as the recording continued. I know, Mark's voice echoed next. But, she's my mother. I can't just. You don't have to do anything, Olivia interrupted in the recording, her voice now full of coldness. I'll handle it. All you have to do is sit back and let it happen. Once the business is ours, we'll have everything we need. We'll be set for life. As the recording finished, the courtroom was deathly silent. I could hear my own breathing, the rhythmic pulse of my heart thudding in my ears. I glanced at Olivia. Her face was a mask of shock and rage, her eyes wide and unblinking. She was caught, undeniably, irrevocably caught. The judge spoke, his voice cutting through the tension. Ms. Bennett, you've heard the evidence presented. Do you have anything to say in your defense? Olivia stood up, her hands trembling ever so slightly, though she tried to maintain her composure. "Your Honor, this is a misunderstanding," she said, her voice trembling with forced confidence. "I never meant to hurt Emma. I only wanted to help. This is all just a mistake." The judge raised an eyebrow, his gaze unwavering. "You call it a misunderstanding, but the evidence is clear. Your actions were calculated. Your intentions were not in line with the truth." Olivia's eyes darted toward Mark, and for the first time, I saw something close to panic in her eyes. She had been cornered. There was nowhere left to run. Mark didn't meet her gaze. Instead, his eyes were fixed on the floor, his face etched with guilt. He knew now. He knew the truth of what had been happening all along. The judge's voice broke through the silence once more. "The court will reconvene after a short recess for deliberation. We will review the evidence and determine the next steps." As the judge left the courtroom, the silence was deafening. Olivia was defeated, and I knew it. But there was still one thing left. Mark. He stood up slowly, his expression unreadable. He walked over to me, and for a moment, we just stood there, face to face. My heart broke as I looked at him. The son I had raised, the son who had been manipulated by someone I had tried so hard to protect him from. "I'm sorry, Mom," Mark said quietly, his voice filled with remorse. "I didn't see it. I didn't know what she was doing." I reached out, placing a hand on his arm. "It's not too late, Mark. You can still make things right." His eyes filled with tears, and I could see the weight of guilt that had been crushing him. But there was hope in his eyes too, the hope that maybe, just maybe, he could start making amends. The courtroom buzzed with a low murmur as we waited for the judge to return. My heart still raced from the intensity of the proceedings, but there was a quiet sense of victory growing inside me. The truth had come out. Olivia's scheme had been exposed, and her manipulations had been laid bare for all to see. I had fought for my family, my legacy, and in the end, I had won. Mark stood beside me, still visibly shaken, but there was a new sense of determination in his eyes. It had taken everything to break free from Olivia's influence, but I could see the remorse in him. He was finally starting to understand the damage she had done, not just to me, but to him, to our family. The doors to the courtroom swung open, and the judge returned to his seat. The room fell silent as the judge cleared his throat, ready to deliver the final verdict. After careful consideration of the evidence presented, the court finds that Olivia Bennet acted with intent to defraud and manipulate in order to gain control of assets to which she was not entitled. The recording, as well as the testimonies, make it clear that her actions were not those of a concerned family member, but of someone attempting to unlawfully seize control of a fortune. I held my breath as the judge paused, looking around the room, his gaze steady and resolute. As such, the court rules in favor of Emma Hayes. All assets will remain in her control. Olivia Bennet will be required to return any property obtained through fraudulent means. Further legal action may be pursued for damages. I felt a weight lift from my chest, but I didn't allow myself to feel triumph just yet. Olivia's actions had gone beyond a mere business takeover. This was about betrayal, about trying to tear apart the foundation of everything I had worked for. The moment the verdict was read, I saw Olivia's expression shift from anger to something darker. It was as if she had finally realized the full extent of her defeat. She had gambled everything on her manipulation, and in the end, she had lost. "I will fight this," Olivia hissed under her breath, her voice barely audible. But the conviction in her words was hollow, a final attempt to salvage what little pride she had left. The judge raised an eyebrow, unfazed by her protests. "That is your right, Ms. Bennet. But I warn you, this court will not be easily swayed. You have already been caught." I stood up slowly, my hands shaking slightly as I absorbed the weight of the judge's ruling. The battle was over, but the emotional toll it had taken on me was immense. I had fought against not just a business betrayal, but a personal one, my own daughter-in-law had tried to steal everything from me. But in the end, it wasn't just the verdict that mattered, it was the lesson learned, the strength to reclaim what was mine, and the knowledge that I could stand up to anyone who sought to take advantage of me. As the courtroom began to clear, I turned to Mark. He was looking at Olivia, who was still sitting, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. For the first time, I saw him look at her with a mixture of pity and disgust, and it made my heart ache. He had trusted her. He had believed in her. But now, there was only a cold distance between them. "Mom," Mark said quietly, his voice breaking slightly. "I'm so sorry. I didn't see it. I was so blinded by everything she said. I never should have. I just didn't know." I reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You didn't know, Mark. But you're seeing it now. And that's what matters." He nodded, tears welling up in his eyes. "I never should have let her manipulate me like that. I've lost so much time. I don't know how I can make it right." "You're doing it right now," I said gently. "By facing the truth. By taking responsibility for your part in this. That's the first step." Olivia stood up abruptly, her eyes cold and full of resentment. "This isn't over," she snapped, before turning and storming out of the courtroom. I didn't watch her leave. I didn't need to. I knew this was the last I would see of Olivia in any meaningful way. She had been so certain of her victory, so convinced that she could manipulate everyone around her. But in the end, it was her own actions that led to her downfall. She had tried to take everything from me, but she hadn't counted on my resolve, my ability to fight back when everything seemed stacked against me. As we left the courthouse, I couldn't help but feel a sense of closure. It wasn't about the money, or the business, it was about something much deeper. It was about family, trust, and the bonds that should never be broken. Mark walked beside me, his hand on my arm, a silent apology in the weight of his touch. We had a long road ahead of us, but at least we had the chance to rebuild. He would learn, and I would help him. In time, we would move forward, stronger than before. As I got into my car, I thought about everything that had happened. I thought about my husband, Robert, and how he would have wanted me to handle this. I had honored his memory by protecting our legacy. I had fought for what was mine, not just for me, but for my son and for the future of the business. The truth had finally come to light, and it had burned away the lies that had threatened to consume us. Olivia had been exposed, and her manipulation was no longer a shadow over our lives. There was no more fear, no more doubt. I looked out of the window as the city skyline stretched before me. There was peace now. Real peace. And with that, I drove into a new chapter of my life, knowing that the real victory wasn't in the court ruling, it was in reclaiming my own strength. Author's note. In this story, justice isn't just about the legal consequences, it's about the emotional and moral resolution that comes from confronting betrayal head-on. Olivia's manipulation was a test of the protagonist's strength, but in the end, it was her resilience and the truth that triumphed. The journey of reclaiming one's power is never easy, but it's one worth fighting for. Through patience and courage, the protagonist found closure, not just in the courtroom, but in her relationship with her son. True justice, after all, is about restoration of trust, family, and self-respect.